You're listening to the 49 Carats Podcast, a 49ers Goldmine production with Stephanie Sanchez.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the 49 Carats Podcast. I am your host, Steph, and today I'm going to be previewing the 49ers offense and how they match up against the Raiders defense this week. It is week 17 of the NFL regular season, and we are just so close to the playoffs, we can taste it. So 49ers, of course, have to get through the Raiders and the Cardinals before getting to the playoffs, but it should make for some pretty favorable matchups for the 49ers. So we're going to talk about that today. Let's just get right into some of the injury reports for both of these teams, right? Today it is December 28th. It's Wednesday. So this is what the teams, their practice reports are looking like. For the 49ers, Nick Bosa did not practice today. He's dealing with an illness, but I don't think this is any concern as of right now. It's Wednesday. There's a lot of time for him to, kind of get over this before playing on Sunday. I think he'll be okay for the game. Javon Kinlaw, he did not practice today. Just keep in mind the 49ers are managing Javon Kinlaw and his reps as they continue to ease him in, coming off of IR not too long ago. So that would explain why Kinlaw had no practice. And Trent Williams today, it's been confirmed that was not injury related. So probably just a rest day or personal day for him. And Mitch Wishnowsky, I didn't see what was going on with Wishnowsky, but we'll have to keep an eye on that one. Make sure it's not anything, too serious for him as well. As of right now, I'm not worried about it. Let's see. Oh, okay. It was an illness for Wishnowsky as well, so he's okay. I would assume he's okay for the game. Deebo Samuel, of course, is not practicing. Jimmy Garoppolo and Kevin Givens also are not practicing. But we did get some updates on some players. So Jimmy Garoppolo, he did get his cast off. That's good news for him. No further updates at the moment on him. Kerry Hyder, he should be back at practice this week, and he is. He was limited today, as well as Eric Armstead was. Jordan Mason, who was dealing with a hamstring injury in last week's game. Christian McCaffrey and Ambry Thomas also limited. Elijah Mitchell also progressing pretty well per Kyle Shanahan, so that's also good news. And Deebo Samuel, he's kind of the one we've all been waiting for. He might come back maybe a week before playoffs. He's making good progress, and Kyle Shanahan said he has a chance to return to practice later this week. So keep an eye on that. I don't think he's going to play this week. There's really no reason for that, but it's good news that he is progressing well. And of course, for the Raiders, their practice report, Derek Carr did not practice. And that is because Derek Carr won't be playing the last two games of the season because Jarrett Stidham will be playing instead. He will be the starter. So no Derek Carr for the 49ers to face this week. It's going to be Jarrett Stidham making his first NFL start. And Derek Carr is pretty much taking a leave from the team for these last 2 weeks because he doesn't want to be a distraction. All right, so not everyone can have a Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback and handle these situations with such grace, right? Anyway, the also limited for the Raiders was their tackle Jackson Barton, running back Zamir White, and corner Rock Ya-Sin. All right, here's another important injury update from the Raiders side. They placed Chandler Jones and Denzel Perryman on IR. Now, Chandler Jones is one of their better pass rushers besides Mason Crosby, and Denzel Perryman is their leading tackler. He also has 2 interceptions this season, which for a linebacker, that's pretty good. So both of those guys aren't going to be facing the 49ers this week. So they're kind of going in this game shorthanded a little bit. Let's talk about the Raiders defense, what they've been able to do so far. It's not great. They're pretty average, all right? So let's look at this here. I'm going to read it off for you. Raiders defense this season, they are 13th in average rushing yards per carry, 15th in rushing yards allowed per game. So they're decent. They're not too bad, not too good in defending the run. But here's where it starts to just kind of dip and go south. They're 22nd in third down conversion percentage allowed, 23rd in points per game allowed, 24th in first downs allowed per game, 25th in touchdowns allowed per game, 25th in total yards allowed per game, 27th in passing yards allowed per game, 27th in red zone scoring percentage. That is just touchdowns only. 30th in sack percentage. So as a team, we hear so much about Mason Crosby, but as a team, as a defense, they're not getting a lot of sacks. They're 30th in sack percentage, 30th in opponent completion percentage. They're allowing a completion percentage of 67.86 this season. And they are 31st, so close to being just dead last. They barely made it. 31st in takeaways per game. So they don't force a lot of turnovers. And again, this is a good thing for the 49ers. I mean, all of these things seem to be favorable for the 49ers in this matchup. And let's talk about the battle of the trenches. As I mentioned, no Chandler Jones in this game. So Chandler Jones, by the way, had 4.5 sacks this season. All the other guys, Bilal Nichols, 2 sacks, Andrew Billings, 2 sacks, Clelin Ferrell, 2 sacks. Besides Mason Crosby, no one else had more than 2 sacks now that Chandler Jones is on IR. The Raiders blitzed 25.9% of the time, which is kind of up there, a little bit less than the Bucks, but more than some other teams or most teams. So that's something to keep an eye on in this game. Maybe they'll blitz. As we know, Brock Purdy has had success throwing against the blitz. So it could be another good game for him. I would assume that it will be. So let's talk about this guy, Mason Crosby, though, because he is their best pass rusher. He's one of the best pass rushers in the league for the last few years. He has 14 sacks this season, 71 pressures. He is second behind Bosa in that department. He's also second in QB knockdowns behind Nick Bosa. He has 54 stops this season and 4 forced fumbles. Forced fumbles is crazy. Like that's good stuff right there. So really, he's only. Oh my God, what am I trying to say? He's the only real threat. That's what I'm trying to say on this Raiders defensive line. And so besides him, there's not too much to worry about in regards to this matchup. And the thing is, I know what you guys are thinking. Well, Steph, it's Mason Crosby going up against Mike McGlinchey. Mike McGlinchey sucks. Mike McGlinchey doesn't suck, okay? You guys just notice when he has bad plays. I'm just going to continue saying it. He is not the best right tackle in the entire league, but he'll get the job done. Mike McGlinchey, totally capable of facing Mason Crosby. I was worried about last week's game, going up against the Commanders, who have a really good defensive line. And besides the 2 penalties, he was fine. He only allowed 1 pressure in 1 hurry. So, yeah, there's not much to not like there. I think he'll have another good game this week. Let me get to some comments here before moving on. Let's see. I appreciate you guys jumping on. Yeah, that's very bad, Steph. A 49ers throwback. I assume you're talking about the Raiders stats, right? Yeah, they are pretty bad in several departments here. So I guess not so surprising that this will be not good. So it'll be a good matchup for the 49ers offense. Philip Bonger says, I've been watching all the Niner content this week, and I feel now that I'm so hyped on this team, there's going to be a big heartbreak. A big heartbreak. Do you think the Niners will lose at some point before the playoffs? it kind of sucks that they haven't, and I'll explain, because going up against the Raiders and Cardinals, I don't expect that they do lose these last two games. But to have a win streak go that long, they'll end if assuming that they beat the Raiders and the Cardinals, they're going to go into the playoffs having won 10 in a row. And that is crazy to keep that up. And I don't know. It just feels like this is just building to something. I don't know if that's what you feel, Philip Bonger, but yeah, the hype is building. This win streak continues to it continues to roll. So it's almost too good to be true. He says, like pre NFC, NFC Championship game loss in the playoffs, because they are on this win streak, right? Because it's hard to sustain win streaks and keep it going that long. I think that's why you feel that way. So I wouldn't be mad if they lost one of these games, but I just don't see it happening. Like, these teams that they're going up against, Raiders and Cardinals, are so bad that unless the 49ers decide to rest guys in that last game against the Cardinals, I don't see them losing. So yeah, unfortunately, they're just gonna have to keep it going, I guess. So they have to keep winning, which is difficult to do. But hey, let's have some faith. Melissa says, let's go. Multi shows with Steph. We spoiled you rule, Steph. Yeah, I did a few episodes. Well, I did an episode yesterday, which I don't normally do episodes on Tuesday. If you guys haven't checked that out, I had former 49ers safety Adrian Colbert on the podcast, and we just talked about, the early years of the Shanahan Lynch era, as well as his thoughts on the current 49ers team. So that was a good episode. If you guys haven't checked that out, it's on my channel. That was yesterday. And then earlier today, Zaddy Ball was back. That is the show that we do with Jason Aponte, Leo Luna, and myself. And it's a lot of fun always. So yeah, a little bit busy. I'm off from work this week, so I get to spoil you guys with more content. Which, by the way, if you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure you guys do that. Sean Sullivan says 49ers need to show they have learned not to play down to the opponent's level, show they can maintain focus on their own game. Yeah, I think they've done that, right? Like, they've played lesser opponents in this win streak, and I don't feel like they've played down to their level. So, I think they're going to show it once again, Sean. I think it's going to be a good game for them. Sean also says Jake Brendel has been quietly amazing this year. Yeah, he hasn't been bad. He got voted into the Pro Bowl, didn't he? Kind of surprising, but yeah, he hasn't been bad. Pleasantly surprised. We'll always take that. All right, let's move along here. Let's talk about the Raiders defense against tight ends. They are allowing an average of 7 targets, 5.2 receptions, 50.9 yards per game to tight ends. Have allowed 6 touchdowns to tight ends this season. Of course, what's so funny is last week, talking about the Commanders defense, we were talking about how the Commanders defense was like the best defense against tight ends this season. And what happened? Well, George Kittle went the hell off. He had 11 targets, 10 catches, 213 yards. So, that wasn't last week. The last 2 weeks, this is what George Kittle has done. 11 targets, 10 catches, 213 yards, 109 yards after the catch, and 4 touchdowns. He had 2 touchdowns last week against the Commanders. Also went over 100 yards. So it was a big game for him, which is crazy because, like I said, the Commanders, throughout the season had been one of the best teams defending against tight ends, but he was just open on both of those touchdown plays. I don't know what they were doing defending him. I guess they pretty much sold out to stop Christian McCaffrey, which I predicted they would do, and I discussed that they might do in my preview episode leading into that game. So in that sense, I wasn't surprised, but George Kittle wasn't exactly expecting him to be the beneficiary, but it seems like he was, and not just the beneficiary of the Commanders focusing on McCaffrey, but also with Deebo Samuel being out. So now, if you guys remember my preview episode last week, I talked about the sample size of, how everyone else does with Deebo Samuel out. And the sample size was small because it was just 2 games, right? 2 other games this season that Deebo Samuel has been out. Now we have 3 games worth of data, I guess, to look at the averages here. Ray McCloud is pretty much non-existent in this offense, even with Deebo Samuel, being out. He did have the carry. I didn't mention it here, but he did have that one carry that he took for I think it was 71-yard touchdown. So that's good. And maybe he'll get another opportunity to handle a carry or 2 in this week's game. However, in 3 games without Deebo Samuel, he's averaging just 2 targets and 9 yards. So not much going there. And Juwan Jennings, I added him to this as well. Juwan Jennings averages 3.5 targets and 26 yards with Deebo Samuel out. But of course, that is 2 games for Juwan Jennings that he's played without Deebo Samuel, because I don't think Juwan Jennings played in week 8 either. So both Deebo and Jennings missed that game. So his sample size is still small. But Ayuk got some love this week as well. He had 81 yards, I believe it was 81. So in 3 games without Deebo, he has 5.6 targets, 60.3 yards, and 0.3 touchdown. Kittle, of course, his numbers have improved without Deebo. So with the larger sample size, he averages 5 targets, 84 yards, and 1.6 touchdowns with Deebo out. So at least a touchdown every time that Deebo misses a game. So I feel good about I feel good about Kittle having another touchdown in this game. Maybe he gets another 2. I don't know. He would have probably only had the 1 had he not intercepted Ray McCloud's end zone target, the one that was way downfield. So, but I expect Kittle to have at least 1 touchdown in this game, just based on these stats, these trends here. And so McCaffrey, I want to talk about McCaffrey because in last week's game against the Commanders, he was a little bit quieter. And as I mentioned, that was because of the Commanders' full-blown effort to sell out to stop McCaffrey. Okay, that was pretty much their game plan on defense, was to stop him. And for the most part, they were pretty successful doing that. And so that brought McCaffrey's averages down a little bit, but without Deebo, he's still averaging 6 targets, 32.3 receiving yards, and 0.3 touchdowns. But also 22 carries, 82.6 rush yards, 4.2 yards per attempt. And he always gets a rushing touchdown in all 3 of those games that Deebo Samuel has been out. So once again, I think I would bet on McCaffrey having at least 1 touchdown in this game, a rushing touchdown, that is. So that's some good stuff there for those guys. Let's see how the Raiders defense defend against wide receivers. They're allowing an average of 19 targets, 12.5 receptions, 155 yards to opposing teams' wide receiver unit per game. And they've allowed 12 touchdowns to wide receivers this season. Going back to the slide here where I talked about their defense and their stats, 27th in passing yards allowed per game. So most of the yardage that they allow is through the air. And so that, I think, is going to be good for, these receivers. And let me talk about their corners really quick. So they have Amik Robertson, Nate Hobbs, and Tyler Hall. And I just want to mention, the Raiders have had a lot of injuries this season. Rock Ya-Sin is a corner who is unsure if he'll play. So as of right now, I'm assuming that he's not going to play, just because it seems like the Raiders at this point are kind of throwing in the towel on the season. Like, I don't think they're going to really risk anyone. So Rock Ya-Sin, he's limited. He may not play, or he may, But right now, I'm assuming that he doesn't. So that's why I have Amik Robertson, Nate Hobbs, and Tyler Hall as their corners this week. Amik Robertson, he started just 5 games this season, and he's allowed 4 touchdowns in his coverage. When you think about 4 touchdowns, not a crazy amount, but when you think about the fact that he's not hasn't been a full-time player all season, then yeah, that becomes a pretty glaring stat there. And then Nate Hobbs, he's allowing 73.4 completion percentage in his coverage this season. He's also allowing a passer rating of 112.6 in his coverage. And this is the kicker, he's allowed 200 yards after the catch this season. I think that is the most damning stat for Nate Hobbs in this Raiders defense because, as we know, the 49ers are one of the best in the league in yards after the catch, even with Deebo Samuel out, because George Kittle can get those. Brandon Ayuk can get that, even Christian McCaffrey at this point. So Nate Hobbs, we're looking at you this week as the weakest link and someone who the 49ers offense could potentially exploit in this matchup. Tyler Hall, he's our slot corner, and he's actually pretty solid. So I don't really have anything bad to say about him, but I think just the fact that, Amik Robertson doesn't have a lot of experience, and Nate Hobbs, seeing what he's been doing this season, I feel good about the 49ers having success through the air this week. Really quickly, Mike V has a question. Any update on Mitchell returning? The latest update from Kyle Shanahan was that he's progressing well. I would imagine that means he's still on track to return for the playoffs. So we'll be seeing Elijah Mitchell, I think, soon enough. Let's talk about the Raiders' safeties, because the safeties are even worse than the corners, okay? Both Trevon Moehrig and Duron Harmon are allowing a completion percentage of 75% or better, typo there, or better in their coverage. Moehrig is allowing a passer rating of 142.1 in his coverage. Harmon is allowing 120.7. So, again, another point for, Brock Purdy in this offense having a good matchup in this game for being able to, throw the football. Their safeties are not good. Again, the Raiders have dealt with some injuries to their secondary, so their safeties are kind of, depleted at this point. So that kind of explains it. But in any case, this should be a pretty favorable matchup for the 49ers as far as being able to throw it through the air. Now let's talk about the Raiders defense against running backs. They're allowing an average of 22.4 carries, 96.1 yards, 4.3 yards per carry average, and 0.7 touchdowns. So a pretty good chance of a touchdown through the ground to opposing team's running backs unit. And they've allowed 11 touchdowns on the ground to running backs. So, like I mentioned earlier, they aren't the best, they aren't the worst, but they are still 13th in average rushing yards per carry and 15th in rushing yards allowed per game, as I mentioned. So just something to keep in mind for this matchup. I think we see a better game from Christian McCaffrey this week after a very quiet outing, because quite frankly, the Raiders defense is not good enough to stop Christian McCaffrey, even if that is their game plan and what they set out to do. They just simply do not have the talent to get that done. Melissa asks, Steph, you buy Bosa being sat for next 2 weeks, or do you take it at face value that if he did, he would still be the clear-cut DPOY? Nick Bosa is not getting sat under any condition in these next 2 games, I don't think. For one, the 49ers are still trying to play for the 2 seed, and in order for them to keep fighting for the 2 seed, they have to keep playing their guys, at least until they get it, unless the Vikings, lose or something like that. But they pretty much have to continue winning, and in hopes that the Vikings are going to drop one. Now, also, I think Nick Bosa is very he wants that record. At the very least, he wants to pass Aldon Smith's 19.5 franchise record of sacks. And I think it's going to be a uphill battle to get the all-time NFL record for sacks. It's certainly possible, but I don't think that he passes it in these next 2 weeks. Again, it is possible, but I just think he's going to be going for it. I don't think they're going to be able to sit him, one, because of they're still going for the 2 seed, and two, because Nick Bosa wants to at least pass that franchise record for sacks. So, no, I'm not really buying it. Moving on. Look, I talked about the Raiders, their running backs, Raiders defense defending against running backs on the ground. But it seems that they are susceptible to getting, not gashed, but they allow running backs to get loose out of the backfield too. So the Raiders defense is allowing an average of 6 catches, 49.7 yards to opposing teams' running backs. And those are some good numbers that we can work with. Christian McCaffrey likes that a lot. They've also allowed running backs to score 4 touchdowns through the air this season. So again, I'm expecting a bigger game for Christian McCaffrey this week. That being said, Christian McCaffrey would be one of those players who, if the 49ers do get an early lead, if the game is a 20-point game in the early going of the game, I would rest Christian McCaffrey. He'd definitely be one of those candidates that, once you get a comfortable lead, you can probably rest him, make sure he's good to go for the playoffs and doesn't suffer any injuries. And Jordan Mason his hamstring should be doing better this week. So I think we'll see Jordan Mason. And if not Jordan Mason, we see more of Ty Davis Price, which, hey, that's okay. He did pretty good last week as well. Let's move on to Brock Purdy. Just win, Purdy. Brock Purdy's first half against the Commanders last week, 5 of 9, 55 yards, and an interception. But in the second half, as we know, he helped this 49ers offense explode. 11 of 12, 179 yards, 2 touchdowns, good for 14.9 yards per attempt. And he's just playing some really good football. And I said it like last week that that Commanders defense was going to be a real test for him, especially with Chase Young coming back. Chase Young looked pretty good in that game too. So that was going to be a big test, but I would say he passed with flying colors, just the way he was able to bounce back from that first half and how he responded in the second half. I think, I feel good about him going in the playoffs, playing tougher defenses after what I saw from him last week against the Commanders. So this week, going up against the Raiders, not half as tough of a defense at all. So I think he's going to have some success. And Melissa asked, Steph, do you think Kittle's 2 touchdowns continues into Vegas? I think it very well could. I think he'll have at least one. I can almost guarantee that. He's building some chemistry with Purdy right now, and he's getting open. So, and Purdy is finding him, so he's going to get him the ball if he gets open. And that's the great thing about Purdy and what we've seen from him so far. And because there's less mouths to feed with Deebo Samuel being out, I think it opens things up for Kittle a little bit more to get those opportunities. So George Kittle, yes, absolutely. At least 1 touchdown, 2 definitely possible after what we've seen these last couple weeks. So should be another good game for George Kittle. Now, here's the talk of the town at the moment. It is obviously about Brock Purdy, but whether or not Brock Purdy should win Offensive Rookie of the Year. We've been talking about Nick Bosa, Defensive Player of the Year. We've started talking about Kyle Shanahan, potential Coach of the Year candidate, even John Lynch, Executive of the Year candidate. But Brock Purdy is throwing his hat in the ring. He's the only quarterback in NFL history with a passer rating of 110 or more in his first 3 starts. And among the rookie quarterbacks, he is first in touchdowns, first in passing yards per game, second in yards per attempt, and second in completion percentage. Now, I know what a lot of people are saying about Brock Purdy, like against him being rookie of the year. It's the fact that it's a small sample size, right? He hasn't played a lot of games. He has started 3 games, and yeah, he started 3 games, has played in 4. He's undefeated in that span. Of course, if he goes on to finish this season, right? If he beats the Raiders, if he beats the Cardinals, then he will be 6-0 undefeated as a starter and end the season that way. Definitely would help his rookie of the year stance. And some of the other candidates have had more playing time throughout the year. Garrett Wilson, Ken Walker, and then there's Christian Watson, who's also one of the favorites. But at this point, Brock Purdy has been moving up in the rankings for offensive rookie of the year. So I'm all aboard this train and wanting Purdy to get that, just because, one, we got to remember, we got to put things into perspective. He was the last pick of the draft, Mr. Irrelevant, all of that. He was a third-string quarterback. I don't think anyone expected him to do what he's doing right now, even with him being on such a talented team. Things could have still derailed. We had no way of knowing that he was going to be looking this good. So I think we got to put all of that into perspective. We were not expecting any of this at all for Brock Purdy. And I think that in itself gives him a bit of a boost for winning rookie of the year. But of course, what happens in these next 2 games will definitely matter, right? So, but like I said, if he can end the season and end up 6-0 as the starter, I think, one, that's a good sample size, and 2, it's kind of undeniable that he's had a positive impact on this team. Let's see. Philip Unger says, I'd like to see Shanny test Purdy's arm and his own passing playbook at game speed against a low-danger team in preparation for a shootout with Kansas City. Yeah, I would love that. Earlier, I called when I was on the Zaddy Ball pod with Jay and Leo. Talking about this matchup, I said it's got to be target practice. You're gonna win this game. I'm sorry, but unless things go really wrong, the 49ers are gonna win this game. And so you might as well just try some things, right? You might as well just see what you can do. Get Brock Purdy some experience, getting more chemistry with his receivers, because why not, right? So, yeah, I'm with you there, Philip Unger. I think that's a good call. 49ers Throwback says, agree. And Steph and Commanders stopped our run game. We only rushed for 76 yards. Purdy still made plays. He did enough to help us win. No Debo and no Mitchell. CMC didn't have a good game. Yeah. So for everyone saying, well, Brock Purdy has all these weapons, that's a great point. 49ers Throwback, they didn't have Debo. They didn't have Mitchell. Christian McCaffrey wasn't a huge part of that game. And Brock Purdy, as I said, with his stats that he had in that second half, yeah, he pretty much willed the 49ers into victory and helped get them those 30 points in the second half. So, yeah, I think he should definitely be in the discussion. Now, whether or not he wins, I don't know, but I think he needs to be in the discussion. So, here we go. Keys of the game for the 49ers offense. And this is just short and sweet, avoid sacks, because Mason Crosby, he's dangerous. He's going to come after. We need Brock Purdy healthy. Okay. We don't need Brock Purdy taking more hits than he needs to. So avoid sacks, avoid hits. That's Brock Purdy's key of the game. And as an offense, they need to improve their red zone scoring. That's one thing that they've kind of, I'm just to nitpick here, because, everything's going so right for this team and they're winning and they're blowing teams out. But going into the playoffs, there are some things that they need to work on, right? No team is perfect. And so for the 49ers, one of those things on the offensive side of the ball is to improve their red zone scoring. And so I think that's one thing they can work on this week against a lesser opponent in the Raiders. Get a better feel for it, get comfortable with it, try different plays. And lastly, the last key of the game is just have fun, because I think the 49ers are going to, win this game. Just have fun out there. It's not easy winning 9 games in a row, and the 49ers have done a lot of work to get that done, to turn the season around, to win the way that they have. So just go out and have fun. I think it shouldn't be too hard to beat this team. So as long as they stick to that game plan and they enjoy themselves, that's all that really matters. So keys of the game for the 49ers offense: avoid sacks, improve red zone scoring, and just have fun out there, okay, in the road to their 9th win in a row. Melissa here says Max Crosby is the Raiders. Steph Mason is the kicker for Cheeseheads. Max Crosby is the Raider. Mason is the kicker for Cheeseheads. Did I say? Oh, Mason. I kept calling him. Yes, you're right. Mason Crosby. You know who I'm thinking of? I'm thinking of Jordan Mason. So I kept calling him Mason Crosby. Mason Crosby has a ring to it, though, doesn't it? Max Crosby. Yes, Max Crosby. Sorry about that, guys. The whole time that I've mentioned Mason Crosby in this episode, I've been talking about Max Crosby. So sorry about that. Melissa says, Steph, do you see Greenlaw on Jacobs and Warner on Waller? Good question. I do have my offense preview episode that I'll be sorry, not offense preview. My 49ers defense preview episode going live tomorrow, which I will talk about this. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a pretty solid prediction. Although, these guys switch off. Sometimes it's Greenlaw covering the tight ends. Sometimes it's Warner, so that's interchangeable for both of these guys. It isn't, exactly strict, and that's okay. That works for them. Philibonger says prediction: Juice is loose against the Raiders. He goes 2 touchdowns. I like that prediction, especially if the 49ers choose to maybe rest Christian McCaffrey for a quarter, for a half. Kyle Juszczyk will probably remain out there. And 2 touchdowns, hey, I could be down with that. Oh, yeah. All right. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to the the offense preview episode. As I mentioned, my 49ers defense preview episode and seeing how they match up against the Raiders offense, that is going to go live tomorrow at around the same time. So make sure you guys tune into that. As always, guys, if you guys have not yet, make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you have not yet, if you like this kind of content. And of course, if you're an audio listener, make sure that you rate this this podcast. I really appreciate all the support. Have a good rest of your evening, guys. Peace.